Does anyone here speak Chinese?
Anyone? Vanessa Holt rushed down the hallway,
Anyone?
heels clicking on marble. Called every translator on her list. No one answered. The billion-dollar deal was falling apart. The investor had already started packing up, a soft voice from behind.
Ma'am, I can speak Chinese. I can help.
Vanessa turned.
Humiliate. Look at you. Filthy. You stink like a cockroach. A black girl cleaning toilets for a living, and you think you can save a billion-dollar deal? Get out of my sight immediately!
Brianna lowered her head, backed away. The investor stood up and stormed out. Vanessa was terrified.
Panic.
But Brianna wasn't. She walked up to the investor and said one sentence. He stopped at the door, turned around.
先生，请等一下
One sentence，
合同翻译错了
changed everything，
我可以解释。
What did Brianna say? But before we get to that sentence, we need to go back. 4 hours earlier. To the moment everything started. 11:40 in the morning. Brianna was behind the grand ballroom, restocking a linen cart in the service corridor. Towels, pillowcases, the usual. Through a propped-open fire door, she heard voices. A group of Chinese executives had just arrived for a preliminary walkthrough. The big meeting was set for 2 in the afternoon. $1 billion on the table. A young interpreter in a gray suit stood between the two sides, translating back and forth. Brianna didn't mean to listen, but she couldn't help it. The lead investor, the man in charge of the entire delegation, was speaking fast. His tone was sharp, frustrated. He was raising a serious concern about a specific clause in the contract. Decision-making power after the acquisition. Who would have control? Who would not? It was a deal-breaker kind of question. But when the interpreter opened his mouth, something changed. The sharpness disappeared. The urgency vanished. What came out on the other side was soft, polite, vague. A general question about timeline flexibility. That was not what the investor said. Brianna's hands stopped folding. Her eyes narrowed. She mouthed the correct translation under her breath, word for word, perfectly, so quiet no one could hear. She understood every single word, not because someone taught her in school, not because she studied abroad. She taught herself, from library books, from podcasts, from years of listening, repeating, and refusing to stop. On her wrist, a bracelet, cheap glass beads, jade green, but not jade. Her grandmother gave it to her before she passed. It was the only thing she had left from the woman who raised her. She gripped the cart handle. The beads pressed into her skin. She knew the translation was wrong. She knew the deal was heading for a cliff. She knew she could say something. But who would listen to a maid? She picked up her towels and walked away. The fire door swung shut behind her. The smell of lavender linen spray hung in the air. She said nothing. Not yet. 12:15. Lunch break. Brianna sat alone in the employee break room. Thermos of rice and beans on the table, earbuds in, eyes half closed. But she wasn't listening to music. On the cracked screen of her phone, a podcast. Not in English. A detailed discussion about international contract law. Entirely in Chinese. Advanced level. The kind of content a corporate lawyer would study before a negotiation. Brianna mouthed along with every word. Sometimes she paused the episode, grabbed a pen, and scribbled something in a small notebook. That notebook. If you saw it from the outside, you wouldn't look twice. Battered cover. Pages warped and swollen from years of use. Held together by a rubber band that had been replaced more than once. But open it, and you'd find something that did not belong in the hands of a hotel maid. 4 languages, on every single page. Chinese, French, Portuguese, Arabic, notes crammed margin to margin, grammar rules, vocabulary lists, full sentences written and rewritten, corrections stacked on top of corrections. This wasn't a casual hobby. This was years of obsession, years of discipline, years of building something enormous in total silence. Nobody at that hotel knew this notebook existed. Nobody had ever asked. Brianna finished eating, tucked the thermos into her locker, clocked back in, grabbed her cart. Floor 14, Suite 1408. She knocked twice. No answer. She swiped her keycard and stepped inside to turn down the bed. On the desk, a room service tray. And beside it, a handwritten note from the guest. He was European. He had written his request in French. Extra pillows, no synthetic fill. He had severe allergies. The note was polite, detailed, and signed with a small merci. Brianna picked it up, read it in 2 seconds. No pause, no confusion, no reaching for a translation app. She read it the way you'd read a text from a friend. Then she pulled the hotel notepad from the drawer, uncapped a pen, and wrote a reply. In French. Fluent, elegant, warm. Every accent mark in place. The kind of handwriting that looked like it came from someone who had written in this language her entire life. She signed it with her employee number only. No name. Then she walked to the reserve closet, pulled out the hypoallergenic pillows, arranged them neatly on the bed, placed the note on top, and moved on. 90 seconds. Start to finish. She didn't pause to admire her work, didn't smile, didn't tell anyone. She just pushed her cart out the door and headed to room 1410. But someone saw. Diane Prescott had been at this hotel for 23 years. She knew every hallway, every shortcut, every guest's favorite brand of coffee. And right now, she was walking past Suite 1408 when she glanced through the open door. She saw Brianna, standing at the desk, writing something, in French. Diane stopped. Her eyebrows rose. Her lips parted slightly. She stood in that corridor for 3 full seconds, just watching. Not moving, not breathing. Brianna didn't notice. She was already gone. Cart squeaking down the hall. Diane stayed for a moment longer. Then she walked away. Slowly, without saying a word. But her face said everything. Now let me paint the full picture for you. That corridor on the 14th floor smelled like hotel disinfectant. That sharp, chemical, floral scent you can never quite name. The air conditioning hummed low through the ceiling vents. And every time Brianna took a step, her shoes, cheap shoes with a sole repaired twice with glue, squeaked softly against the carpet. That sound. The squeak of glued-together shoes on hotel carpet. Remember it. It's going to come back. The elegance of her mind. The poverty of her shoes. That gap. That is this entire story. 14 floors below, the deal was already cracking. The investor's frustration was growing. The interpreter kept smoothing over words that needed to stay sharp. The gap between what was said and what was heard, wider by the minute. But nobody in that boardroom knew the one person who could fix it all was upstairs. Pushing a cart, changing pillowcases, completely invisible. The most qualified person in the building didn't have a seat at the table. She didn't even have a name tag anyone bothered to read. So how does a hotel maid end up speaking 4 languages? Let me take you back. South side of Chicago. A neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the corner store had bulletproof glass. Brianna grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with her grandmother, Loretta. Loretta cleaned offices downtown for 30 years. Same route, same buildings, Same mop. She never complained. Not once. But Loretta had something most people didn't know about. She was Haitian. She spoke fluent Creole French. And every single night, she spoke it to Brianna, at the dinner table, during homework, while braiding her hair before bed. And she told Brianna one thing that stuck forever. Language is the one thing nobody can repossess. Not the landlord, not the boss, not anybody. It's yours. Brianna believed her. When Loretta passed away, Brianna was 19, alone, no parents, no savings, no college fund. But she found one thing in her grandmother's purse, a library card, still active. That library card changed everything. Brianna started going to the public library every day after her shifts. She sat in the language section for hours, used the free internet, found online courses, downloaded podcasts, watched foreign films with subtitles until she didn't need them anymore. She picked up Chinese at 22. She kept hearing tourists at the hotel struggling to ask simple questions, and she thought, I want to understand them. So she learned. By herself. Word by word. Month by month, Portuguese came from a coworker who spoke it at home. Arabic came from a night school class she attended for 8 months, until the program lost funding and shut down. 4 languages, 0 degrees, 1 library card. At some point, she applied for a front desk position at the hotel. She thought maybe, just maybe, someone would see what she could do. Vanessa Holt reviewed the application, saw housekeeping under current position, rejected it, no interview. The rejection note said, this role requires a professional communication background. Brianna folded that note and tucked it into her notebook. Page 34. It's still there today, and the bracelet on her wrist. The cheap glass beads that look like jade but aren't. Loretta gave it to her the last Christmas they spent together. It's not jade, baby, but it's yours. She never took it off. 1:15 in the afternoon. The lobby. The Chinese delegation had taken a break before the formal 2 o'clock meeting. Most of them were upstairs in their suites. But one, a younger member of the group, was sitting on a lobby sofa with his phone pressed to his ear. He was upset. You could hear it in his voice even if you didn't understand the words. He was speaking fast, tense, almost whispering, but not quite. He was telling whoever was on the other end that the interpreter was a problem, that the man kept softening the lead investor's words, turning sharp concerns into polite suggestions, turning deal breakers into gentle questions. He said the investor was losing patience, that if this kept going, the man would walk. He said the investor already didn't trust anyone in the room. 3 feet away, Brianna was wiping down the lobby's glass coffee table. She heard every word. Her hand slowed on the glass. Not because she was trying to eavesdrop, but because she understood every single sentence. And what she was hearing confirmed exactly what she'd caught earlier behind the ballroom. The interpreter was failing. The deal was bleeding. And nobody on the hotel's side had any idea. She kept wiping. Slower now. Processing. Then a second delegate walked over. He asked the younger one a simple question. Where's the restroom, and what happened next? Brianna didn't plan it. It just came out. She pointed down the corridor and answered him, calmly, clearly, in perfect Chinese, told him, down the hall, second door on the left, 4 seconds of speech. That's all it was, 4 seconds. Both men froze. The younger delegate lowered his phone, looked at Brianna, looked at her uniform, looked at the spray bottle in her hand, then looked at his colleague, then back at Brianna. His mouth opened slightly. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, under his breath, just loud enough for his colleague to hear, he whispered, "Did the cleaning lady just speak to us in perfect Chinese?" Brianna didn't wait for a response. She picked up her spray bottle, tucked her cloth into her apron, and walked away. Steady pace, no expression, heart pounding under the wrinkled uniform. She didn't look back. The younger delegate stood in the middle of the lobby for a long beat. Still, staring at the corridor she'd disappeared into. Then he did something. He pulled out his phone. Not the same call as before. A new one. He dialed a different number. He put the phone to his ear and spoke quickly. He was calling the lead investor directly. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, it was just directions. 4 seconds. No big deal. But here's what you need to understand. In that world, in the world of billion-dollar negotiations, trust is everything. And trust starts with language, not contracts, not presentations. Language. The feeling that someone actually understands what you're saying. Not just the words, the meaning behind them. That 4-second sentence didn't just give directions to a restroom. It told 2 men that someone in this building understood them. Really understood them. And that feeling, after hours of being misinterpreted, was worth more than any slide deck in that boardroom. That sentence traveled further than Brianna could have imagined. We cut to the private lounge upstairs. The lead investor is sitting in a leather chair, phone to his ear, listening. His expression shifts. Not surprise, not shock, interest. Something just changed. And Brianna had no idea. 1:25. Vanessa Holt was standing behind a marble column near the lobby entrance, adjusting a flower arrangement for the afternoon. That's when she saw it. Brianna, standing near the coffee table, talking to 2 members of the Chinese delegation, not just gesturing, not pointing at a map, talking, and the 2 men were nodding, smiling, engaged. They looked more comfortable with her than they had looked with anyone on the hotel's team all day. Vanessa's stomach dropped. This was not admiration. This was fear. A housekeeping employee had just done, casually, in a wrinkled uniform, what her entire guest relations department could not do. She moved fast. Vanessa crossed the lobby in 6 steps. She didn't wait for the delegates to leave. She didn't pull Brianna aside. She did it right there, in the open, in front of front desk staff, in front of bellhops, in front of guests sitting in the lounge. "What do you think you're doing?" Brianna turned. "They asked me a question. I was just what? Playing translator? You think because you memorized a few words from the internet, you can walk up to our most important clients and start chatting?" Brianna didn't respond. Vanessa stepped closer. Her voice got quieter, but sharper. The kind of quiet that cuts deeper than yelling. "Let me make something very clear. You clean rooms. That is what you do. That is all you do. You are not qualified to speak to anyone in this hotel above the 4th floor. And you are certainly not qualified to open your mouth in front of people who are worth more than you will ever make in your lifetime." Brianna's knuckles turned white around the spray bottle. "If I see you near a VIP guest one more time, if I even hear your name mentioned outside of housekeeping, I will personally make sure you never work in this city again. Not here. Not anywhere." Vanessa straightened her blazer, turned on her heel, and walked away. Nobody in the lobby said a word. The front desk staff stared at their screens. The bellhop looked at the floor. A guest lowered his newspaper and frowned, but no one spoke up. Not one person. Brianna stood still for 3 seconds. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "Yes, ma'am." She walked to the service elevator, pressed the button, waited. The doors opened. She stepped inside. The doors closed. And then she broke. Not loudly, not dramatically. She leaned against the metal wall. Her hands were shaking. She looked down at the glass bead bracelet on her wrist and closed her eyes. She whispered her grandmother's words, the phrase Loretta used to say every night. The one about language being the one thing nobody can take from you. But this time, her voice cracked halfway through. She opened her notebook, flipped to page 34, the rejection letter. Still folded. Still there. She stared at it for a long time. Then she turned to the next page. Blank. She picked up her pen and wrote one line. Maybe she's right. 3 words. That's all. She closed the notebook, pressed it against her chest, and exhaled. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Gerald Crawford sat in his office reviewing the briefing documents. Something nagged at him. The interpreter's translation summaries didn't match his own notes. The tone was off. The meaning felt diluted. He flagged it mentally. But the meeting was in 30 minutes. He had 10 other fires to put out. He moved on. He shouldn't have. 135, floor 14, the business center. Brianna walked in to empty the recycling bin, eyes still red, hands still not quite steady. On the printer tray, a stack of forgotten pages. Someone from the hotel's legal team had printed them and walked away. The English version of the acquisition term sheet, the actual contract. Brianna should not have read it. She read it. In under 2 minutes, she found it. The exact clause the investor had been upset about. And now, seeing both sides, she understood the full picture. The English version said collaborative oversight, shared decision-making, a partnership. But the version the interpreter had communicated to the Chinese side, the version she'd overheard that morning, used language much closer to full transfer of authority. Complete handover. No shared power at all. 2 sides. Same table. 2 completely different deals. The investor wasn't being difficult. He was being logical. He was rejecting a contract that, in his language, asked him to give up everything. And nobody on the hotel's side had any idea. Brianna put the pages back on the tray. She picked up the recycling bin, walked to the door, took 3 steps into the hallway, and stopped. She could tell someone. But who? Vanessa had just promised to destroy her career. Raymond wouldn't even make eye contact anymore. She had no allies, no credibility, no title that anyone would take seriously. She kept walking, chose silence. Not because she was weak, but because she had been beaten down too many times to believe that speaking up would change anything. She sat in the break room alone, notebook closed, staring at nothing. That's when Diane Prescott appeared in the doorway. Diane had been looking for her for 15 minutes. She sat down across from Brianna, quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The guest in room 1408, the French gentleman. He called the front desk." Brianna looked up. He wanted to know who wrote the note in his room. He said the handwriting was beautiful. He asked for the person by name. Diane paused. "I gave him yours." Brianna stared at her. Nobody, in all her years at that hotel, had ever asked for her by name. Diane looked at the notebook on the table. The pages were visible, 4 different languages on a single spread. Her eyes widened. "How many languages do you speak?" Brianna didn't answer the question, but something shifted in her. Maybe it was because Diane was the first person to ask instead of order. Maybe it was because someone finally looked at her with curiosity instead of contempt. She told Diane everything: the mistranslation, the governance clause, the interpreter softening the investor's words, the deal falling apart because both sides thought they were signing two different contracts. All of it. Diane listened without interrupting. Then she said, "You need to tell Mr. Crawford." Brianna shook her head. "Ms. Holt just said if I show my face again." Brianna. Diane's voice was calm, but iron. "I've been at this hotel 23 years. Gerald Crawford is the only manager I've ever seen who actually listens. If you have something real, and I believe you do, he will hear you." She leaned forward. "Vanessa can fire you for speaking up, but if you stay silent, you fire yourself, every day, for the rest of your life." The room went quiet. Brianna looked down at her notebook. Page 34, the rejection letter. Then the next page. Maybe she's right. She picked up her pen, drew a single line through those 3 words. Didn't write anything to replace them. Just the strike-through. She closed the notebook, stood up. "What floor is Mr. Crawford's office on?" Diane smiled, the first real smile in the entire story. "3rd floor, turn left. I'm coming with you. 150. 10 minutes before the meeting. 3rd floor. Gerald Crawford's office." The nameplate on the door read General Manager. Behind it, a man reviewing documents with a pen in one hand and a cold coffee in the other. Diane and Brianna arrived at the door. Gerald's assistant stood up immediately, blocking the way. "He's preparing for the 2 o'clock. No walk-ins." Diane didn't flinch. "She has critical information about the deal. I've been here 23 years. I'm vouching for her personally." The assistant hesitated. Looked at Diane. Looked at Brianna, the wrinkled uniform, the spray bottle still clipped to her apron. Then he looked back at Diane. 23 years is a lot of weight. He stepped aside. Diane stayed at the threshold. She nodded at Brianna. "Go." Brianna walked in alone. Gerald looked up. He didn't ask why a maid was in his office. He didn't call security. He just set his pen down and waited. Brianna spoke. Fast, clear. No wasted words. She explained the mistranslation, the governance clause, how the English version promised shared oversight, but the interpreted version told the Chinese side they'd be handing over full control. She explained that the investor wasn't being unreasonable. He was responding logically to a contract that, in his language, was asking him to surrender everything. She laid it out like a lawyer, precise, structured, confident. Gerald listened. Then he turned his laptop around and pointed at a paragraph in the Chinese version of the term sheet. "What does this say?" Brianna translated it. "Live, without hesitation, fluid, legally accurate, every term in place." Gerald leaned back in his chair, stared at her for a long moment, then picked up his phone and canceled the interpreter's access badge for the afternoon. But he wasn't done. He stood up, walked around his desk, and looked Brianna directly in the eyes. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." Brianna nodded. "If I bring you into that room, in front of my board, in front of the ownership group, in front of a man who controls more money than this entire city block, and it falls apart, if the translation is wrong, if the deal collapses because of something you said or didn't say, are you prepared to carry that? $1 billion loss on your name." The office went silent. Just the hum of the air vent, the distant chime of an elevator. Brianna didn't look at the floor, didn't swallow, didn't hesitate. She looked Gerald Crawford straight in the eyes. Yes. One word. No conditions. Gerald held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then the corner of his mouth lifted. Just barely. Good. Because if you'd said anything else, I wouldn't have believed you could do it. He glanced toward the hallway where Diane was still standing. Gave her a single nod. Thank you. Diane nodded back. 23 years, spent on exactly the right moment. Gerald opened the door, walked out beside Brianna, not in front, not behind, beside. He didn't offer her a blazer, didn't suggest she fix her hair. She walked in the same wrinkled uniform, glue-soled shoes, and glass bead bracelet, because what she carried was never in the costume. 158. The hallway outside the grand boardroom. It was a long corridor. Marble floors. Brass sconces casting warm light against the walls. The kind of hallway built to make people feel important. 2 people walked down it, side by side, and if you closed your eyes and just listened, you'd hear 2 completely different lives. Gerald's shoes, polished leather, clicked sharp and steady against the stone. The sound of authority, of belonging. Brianna's shoes, glued soles, repaired twice, squeaked softly with every step. The sound of someone who was never supposed to be here. 2 different soundtracks. Same hallway, same direction. At the far end of the corridor, behind the front desk, Diane Prescott stood watching them walk. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter. Her knuckles were white. She had just bet 23 years of credibility on this moment. Everything she'd built, every ounce of trust, was walking down that hallway in a wrinkled uniform. Gerald didn't look at Brianna as he spoke. He kept his eyes forward. My mother cleaned rooms in a hotel in Scranton, Pennsylvania. 22 years, same hotel, same floors. Brianna listened. She could tell you the life story of every guest on her floor. Their allergies, their arguments, their children's names. She knew more about people than anyone I've ever met. He paused, just for a breath. She would have liked you. Brianna said nothing for a moment. The only sound was their footsteps. Click, squeak, click, squeak, echoing down the empty hall. Then she spoke, quietly. My grandmother said the same thing about her guests. She touched the glass bead bracelet on her wrist. She said the ones who clean the room always know the room best. Gerald didn't respond. He didn't need to. The silence between them said more than any words could. 2 people from different worlds, different skin, different tax brackets, different everything. But they both came from women who cleaned rooms for a living. Women who were never seen, never thanked, never asked what they knew. And that one thing, that invisible thread, connected them more deeply than any handshake or business card ever could. They reached the double doors of the boardroom. Through the frosted glass, silhouettes, movement, muffled voices, the low hum of tension. Gerald put his hand on the door handle. He looked at Brianna. Ready? She nodded. Once. He pushed the door open. 2 o'clock. The grand boardroom, mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. 12 leather chairs. Crystal water glasses lined up perfectly. Not one of them touched. On one side, the hotel's executive team. Vanessa Holt seated prominently, back straight, jaw clenched. Philip Ellsworth from the ownership group sitting apart in the corner, watching everything, saying nothing. On the other side, the Chinese delegation. 6 men in tailored suits, and at the far end of the table, the lead investor. Arms folded, jaw tight. The look of a man who had already made up his mind. The mood was ice cold, the kind of silence that doesn't mean calm. It means something is about to break. And what nobody on the hotel's side knew, the investor had already told his team, quietly, that he was leaving in 15 minutes. In his mind, the deal was dead. He was just waiting for the right moment to make it official. Then the boardroom door opened. Gerald Crawford walked in first. Calm, measured. Brianna walked in behind him. Every head in the room turned. Vanessa shot to her feet. Her chair cracked against the wall. "Gerald, what is this? She's a housekeeper. I gave her a direct order not to come anywhere near." Gerald didn't look at her. His tone was flat, final. "Vanessa, sit down, or leave the room. Pick one." Dead silence. Not a breath, not a rustle. Vanessa looked around the table, at the delegation, at Ellsworth, at the faces staring back at her. Nobody came to her defense. She sat down. Her hands gripped the armrests until her knuckles went white. Now remember, this is the moment from the beginning of the story. This is where we left off. Vanessa had already panicked. She had already called every translator on her list. She had already run down the hallway screaming for someone who speaks Chinese. And she had already looked Brianna in the face, the one person who could help, and told her she was nothing. But now Brianna was in the room, and there was nothing Vanessa could do about it. The investor stood. He spoke quickly, sharply, every sentence harder than the last. He listed every grievance, the mistranslated clause, the feeling that his concerns had been watered down, the sense that nobody on this side respected him enough to hear what he was actually saying. His voice rose. His delegation sat stone still. He finished with 5 words. "We are leaving. It is over." He reached for his briefcase, clicked it open, began sliding papers inside. The room looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at Brianna. This was it. The billion-dollar moment. The one Gerald had warned her about 10 minutes ago. A billion-dollar loss on your name. Are you willing to carry that? She had said yes, now it was time to prove it. Brianna stepped forward. She didn't wait for permission. She didn't ask to be introduced. She didn't look at Vanessa. She didn't look at the floor. She looked directly at the investor and began to speak. In Chinese, fluent, precise, calm, respectful, but absolutely unwavering. She didn't translate for the room. She spoke to the investor, only him, as if nobody else existed. First, she repeated his concerns back to him, every single one, word for word. Not a polished version, not a softened summary. The real thing, exactly as he had said it, proving beyond any doubt that she understood every word. The investor's hand stopped moving inside his briefcase. Then she explained. She told him about the governance clause, how the English version used the phrase collaborative oversight, shared decision-making, a partnership between equals. But the interpreted version, the one his team had been hearing all day, used language that meant full transfer of authority, total handover, no shared power. 2 sides, same table, 2 entirely different deals, neither side knowing it. And then she said the line that changed everything. You were not being deceived. You were being mistranslated. Those are very different things. The room stopped breathing. The investor's hand slowly pulled away from the briefcase. He looked at Brianna. Really looked. Not at the uniform. Not at the spray bottle still clipped to her apron. Not at the glue holding her shoes together. at her eyes, at the certainty in her voice. He closed the briefcase, set it aside, unfolded his arms, and sat down. The entire room exhaled. Vanessa, white as paper, sank deeper into her chair. Philip Ellsworth leaned forward for the first time all day and began writing in his notebook. The junior delegate, the one from the lobby, that sat back and nodded, a ghost of a smile on his face. Raymond Tucker, standing in the doorway because guilt had dragged him downstairs, covered his mouth with both hands. Gerald stood perfectly still, but if you looked closely, just at his eyes, you could see it. Pride, enormous, barely contained. The investor spoke again, softer now. "Who taught you to speak like this?" Brianna didn't hesitate. "A public library, and a woman who cleaned offices for 30 years. Silence, complete, heavy, the kind that follows something true. The investor reached for his water glass, the first person in that room to touch one all day. He drank slowly, set it down. One word. "Continue." And she did. For the next 45 minutes, Brianna served as the live interpreter. But she didn't just translate words. She translated meaning, culture, intent. When the hotel team used a phrase that would sound aggressive in Chinese, she adjusted it, kept the point, removed the edge. When the investor quoted a proverb, she didn't stumble through a literal translation. She found the English equivalent so both sides could feel what he meant. She wasn't just a linguist. She was a bridge, a diplomat in a wrinkled uniform, the smartest person in a room full of executives, and the only one nobody had bothered to ask. The tension dropped. The conversation flowed. The water glasses, one by one, were finally picked up. Then, near the end, the investor raised his hand. The room fell quiet. He asked to speak privately with Gerald. Everyone stood. The delegation filed out. The executives followed. Vanessa left without making eye contact with anyone. Brianna turned to leave, too. The investor's voice stopped her. "Not you." She turned around. "You stay." The boardroom was empty now. Just 3 people. Gerald Crawford, Brianna Davis, and the investor. The sharpness from earlier was gone. The investor sat back in his chair. His voice was slower now, deliberate. The anger had left his face. Something else had taken its place, something that looked a lot like respect. He spoke to Gerald, through Brianna, who translated every word. The deal would go forward. The terms would be revised based on the correct translation. His team would remain through the week to finalize everything, but he had one condition, non-negotiable. He looked at Brianna, not at Gerald, at her. "She is the liaison, not offered, named. She handles all communication between my team and yours through the entire transition. No exceptions." Gerald didn't hesitate. He nodded once. The investor leaned forward. His voice dropped, quieter now, almost personal. "I do not trust buildings. I do not trust titles. I trust people. And today, she was the only person in this room who spoke to me without a mask. The only one who told me the truth." Gerald turned to Brianna and extended his hand. Not as a boss to an employee, not as a favor being granted, as one professional to another, an equal. Brianna shook it. Firm, steady. The glass bead bracelet, her grandmother's bracelet, caught the afternoon light from the window. Then Gerald walked to the boardroom doors and pushed them open. The hallway was packed, the full delegation, the executive team, hotel staff who had heard whispers and drifted closer, bellhops, front desk workers, people from catering, Everyone waiting, everyone watching. Gerald stepped out first. He turned to face the crowd, and in front of every suit, every title, every person who had walked past Brianna for years without seeing her, he said, "I want this on the record. Today's deal was saved by Brianna Davis, an employee our system nearly overlooked. That failure belongs to the system, not to her." The hallway went silent, completely still. The investor walked out behind him. He stopped directly in front of Brianna, in full view of everyone, and he lowered his head. A small, deliberate bow, a gesture of professional respect. Quiet. But in his culture, it carried the weight of 1,000 words. Through Brianna, who for the first time in her life translated her own introduction, he announced that the deal was confirmed, and that Ms. Davis would serve as the primary cultural and linguistic liaison going forward. Then it started, one by one, like dominoes falling. Philip Ellsworth, the man from the ownership group who had spent the entire day sitting in a corner, watching, saying nothing, rose from his chair. He crossed the hallway, reached into his jacket, and placed his business card directly in Brianna's hand. 3 words. "Call me Monday." The junior delegate, the young man from the lobby, the one who had first heard Brianna speak Chinese over a glass coffee table, stepped forward and shook her hand. He held it for a moment longer than necessary. "I knew it. The second you spoke in the lobby, I knew." Raymond Tucker stood at the back of the crowd. He didn't step forward, didn't speak. He just stood there with his head bowed, arms at his sides. Guilt, relief, shame, admiration. All of it written on his face all at once. And at the far end of the corridor behind the front desk, Diane Prescott watched everything unfold. Tears streaming silently down her face, hands gripping the counter so tight her arms trembled. She didn't wipe her eyes. She didn't look away. 23 years at this hotel. 23 years of quiet competence, of being reliable, of never being noticed. And this single moment, the moment she had made possible, made every one of those years worth it. Then, one more thing, a small detail, almost too perfect to be real, but it was. The French guest from Suite 1408 was crossing the lobby with his luggage, checking out. He knew nothing about the deal, nothing about the boardroom, nothing about any of it. But he saw Brianna standing in that hallway surrounded by people in suits, and he stopped, and he smiled, and he raised his hand in a small, warm wave. He just knew she had written something beautiful in his language that morning. That was all he knew, and that was enough. Now, Vanessa. After the crowd cleared, Gerald asked her to stay behind, just the two of them. The boardroom door closed. Through the frosted glass, 2 silhouettes. Gerald standing, Vanessa sitting. Nobody heard what was said inside that room, but everyone heard what came next. 2 weeks later, Vanessa Holt was no longer the director of guest relations. There was no dramatic scene, no shouting match in the hallway. That's not how justice works in real life. She was demoted, quietly, moved to an assistant administrative role at a satellite office in the suburbs, a small building with fluorescent lights, no marble floors, no crystal glasses, no billion-dollar clients. The official record read, "Conduct detrimental to workplace environment and obstruction of operational processes." But every person in that hotel knew the truth. She nearly destroyed a billion-dollar deal, not because she lacked resources, not because the problem was unsolvable, but because she could not stomach the idea that a black woman in a wrinkled uniform was more capable than she would ever be. And here's the detail that stays with you long after the story ends. During Vanessa's final week at the main hotel, she had to walk past Brianna's new office every single day. It was the only route to the parking garage. And on that door, mounted at exactly eye level, a brass nameplate. Brianna Davis, Cultural and Linguistic Liaison. Every morning, every evening, impossible to avoid, impossible to unsee. On her last day, Vanessa was carrying a box of her things down the corridor when Brianna came walking from the opposite direction. They stopped, face to face, the hallway empty, no audience, no witnesses. 3 seconds of silence. Brianna spoke first. Her voice was calm, steady, no sarcasm, no bitterness, no victory lap. "I wish you all the best, Miss Holt." Vanessa didn't respond. She adjusted the box in her arms, turned, and walked away. Her heels clicked against the marble, faster, faster, then softer, softer, until the sound disappeared completely. That was the last time they ever saw each other. Brianna didn't need Vanessa to fall in order to rise. But sometimes justice doesn't need to shout. It just places the right person in the right doorway and lets the silence speak for itself. That evening, Brianna sat alone in her new office. Quiet. Still. She opened a drawer and pulled out the old notebook. Flipped to page 34. The rejection letter. Still there. Still folded. Vanessa's words from a year ago. This role requires a professional communication background. Brianna unfolded it slowly, placed it in a simple frame, hung it on the wall, right beside her brass nameplate. Then she turned to the next page. 3 handwritten words with a single line struck through them. Maybe she's right. She taped that page next to the letter. The rejection, the doubt she almost believed, and the nameplate that proved them both wrong. 3 things. 1 wall. The whole story. She didn't keep the letter out of bitterness. She kept it to remember that the biggest mistake is never being underestimated. It's believing the people who underestimate you. So what happened to Brianna Davis? 6 months later, she completed a professional certification in international business mediation. Full tuition paid by the hotel group. Every single cent. The investor invited her to Shanghai to work directly with his transition team. 3 months on the ground, face to face, speaking his language every day. It was the first time Brianna had ever been on an airplane. Let that sit for a second. A woman who taught herself 4 languages from a public library, using free internet and borrowed books, had never once left the country where nobody bothered to listen to her. She learned to speak to the world before the world ever gave her a chance to see it. But now she was seeing it. Philip Ellsworth, the man who sat silently through that entire boardroom meeting, then stood up and placed his business card in her hand, connected her to a network of multinational corporations in need of cultural liaison specialists. Within her first month, she received 3 job offers, big companies, big salaries, big offices. She turned down all 3 because Brianna Davis didn't want a seat at someone else's table anymore. She was done waiting to be invited. She wanted to build her own. She launched her company 6 months after that boardroom, named it after the woman who started everything, the woman who mopped floors for 30 years and never stopped teaching her granddaughter that language, was the one thing nobody could take away. Loretta and Davis Cultural Consulting. The logo, a bracelet, and Diane Prescott? The woman who walked the hallways looking for Brianna when everyone else looked away? The woman who sat down beside her in the break room and said, "I believe you," when nobody else would. She was promoted to Director of Guest Relations, the exact position Vanessa Holt once held. Same office, same desk, same view. After 23 years of standing behind a front desk, quiet, competent, invisible, someone finally saw Diane too. At the announcement, she stood in front of the staff and said one sentence. "I didn't discover Brianna. I was just the first person who didn't look away." And Vanessa? She left the hotel entirely. 4 months after her demotion. No farewell email, no goodbye lunch, no announcement on the company board. No one asked where she went. No one noticed she was gone. Sometimes the heaviest punishment isn't being fired. It's becoming invisible, in exactly the way you once made someone else feel. The same silence you gave to others becomes the silence that swallows you. Now, one more thing about Brianna. She used a portion of her company's first profits to fund something that had nothing to do with business. Something personal, a free language learning program. At the same public library where she once sat alone under fluorescent lights, teaching herself word by word, night after night, with nothing but a library card and a cracked phone screen. She named the program after her grandmother, the Loretta Program, because a library card changed her life, and she wanted to make sure it could change someone else's too. Now let me give you some numbers, because this isn't just a feel-good story. There are an estimated 43 million multilingual adults in the United States. 43 million. Most of them work in jobs that never once ask what languages they speak. The average cost of a single failed international deal due to cultural miscommunication, $12.5 million. The cost of simply asking the right person the right question, $0. So here's what I want to leave you with. Tomorrow, maybe even today, you're going to walk past someone invisible, a janitor mopping a hallway, a cashier scanning your groceries, a driver waiting in a parking lot. You'll see the uniform, the mop, the name tag, but you won't see what's underneath. Maybe they speak 4 languages. Maybe they solve equations on their lunch break. Maybe they write poetry in a notebook nobody has ever asked to read. You will never know, unless you stop, unless you ask, unless you choose to look. Just once. That's all it takes. If you know someone like Brianna, or if you are one, leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me the language you taught yourself. Tell me the talent nobody sees. And if someone out there needs to hear this today, share it. Send it to them. Let them know they are not invisible. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And remember, workplace language programs and public library funding are 2 of the most powerful talent pipelines in this country. One library card changed Brianna's life. Imagine 1,000. The room didn't give her power. It finally stopped blocking the door. This story is for every Brianna still folding towels, and for every Diane who chose to look.
You know what stayed with me after this story? 1. Never stop building yourself. Even when nobody is paying attention, even when nobody is clapping, you learn something new. You grow, you get sharper. That's yours. Nobody gave it to you. Nobody can take it back. The world might not see it today, but one day it will, and you'll be glad you didn't quit. 2. Stop letting other people's opinions become the truth. Someone say you are not enough. That's what they see. That's not what you are. The real danger isn't being underestimated. The real danger is when you start agreeing with them. That's the moment you lose. 3. Speak up, even when it's scary, even when nobody invited you, even when the room feels like it wasn't built for you. Staying silent doesn't protect you. It just makes you invisible. And invisible is not safe. Invisible is just slow disappearing. And 4. Look at the people around you. Even look, not at what they wear, not at their job title, and who they are. You'll be amazed at what people carrying inside them that nobody ever bothered to ask about. So, let me ask you, have you ever been counted out by someone who didn't know what you were capable of? Tell me in the comments. If this one hit you, share it, like it, subscribe so you'll hear for the next one. And remember, the values doesn't depend on who watching. It depends on what you are building when nobody is.